The hamburger. Few foods define the American diner more completely. By the 1950s, the hamburger had already been around for decades, but it was the post-war diner culture that turned it into an icon. A beef patty, griddled flat on a hot iron surface, served on a soft bun with mustard, ketchup, and a slice of pickle. Simple, fast, and satisfying. Diners competed over whose burger was juicier, whose bun was fresher. It became the centerpiece of the menu board and the first thing most customers ordered. Macaroni and cheese. The baked version that showed up in diners was different from anything out of a box. Elbow macaroni mixed with a thick cheese sauce, poured into a dish, and baked until the top was golden and slightly crisp. It was a side dish on most menus, but substantial enough that many customers ordered it as a main with nothing else. Children loved it, but so did adults who had grown up eating it at home. The diner version carried a richness that made it feel indulgent, despite being made from the most basic ingredients. Apple pie. It closed the meal and anchored the dessert case. Displayed under a glass dome near the register, a slice of apple pie was the expected ending to a proper diner visit. The filling was sweet and spiced with cinnamon. The crust was short and pale gold. Some diners served it warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream, a combination that became its own small ritual. Apple pie carried a cultural weight in 1950s America that went beyond taste. It stood for something familiar and dependable, which was exactly what the post-war diner was trying to offer: liver and onions. It was not for everyone, but it had a dedicated following. Thin slices of beef liver cooked on the griddle with caramelized onions, served alongside mashed potatoes, and sometimes a piece of white bread. Liver and onions represented the older, more working-class side of the diner menu. It was nutritious, inexpensive, and filling, which mattered to the factory workers, truck drivers, and laborers who made up a large part of the diner customer base. The strong flavor was an acquired taste, but regulars who loved it considered it one of the best things on the menu. The grilled cheese sandwich. Cheap ingredients and a hot griddle were all it took. 2 slices of white bread, a layer of American cheese, and enough butter to make the outside crisp and golden. In the 1950s, American cheese was everywhere, processed and consistent, which made it perfect for a busy diner kitchen. The grilled cheese was a comfort food before that phrase was commonly used. It showed up on lunch counters next to a bowl of tomato soup, and that combination became a staple of the era. Pancakes. The diner breakfast menu leaned heavily on them. A short stack arrived at the table golden and slightly thick, with a tab of butter melting into the top layer and a small metal pitcher of maple syrup on the side. Diners served breakfast all day, and pancakes were requested at every hour. They were fast to make, inexpensive, and filling. Customers who came in after a late shift or before an early one ordered them without looking at the menu. Some diners added blueberries or served them with a side of bacon, but the plain version was always the most ordered. Pork chops. Diners that offered a hot plate section often listed pork chops as one of the daily specials. Hand-fried until the outside was browned and slightly crisp, served with applesauce and a side of green beans or mashed potatoes. Pork was affordable and widely eaten in 1950s America, and the diner version of a pork chop plate felt like a full home-cooked meal at a reasonable price. It was the kind of dish that drew in older customers and workers looking for something hearty in the middle of the day. Beef stew. On colder days, it showed up as the hot special, slow-cooked with carrots, potatoes, and celery in a thick brown broth. Diners that made their own beef stew from scratch earned a reputation for it, because the difference between a freshly made version and one reheated from a can was immediately noticeable. Served in a wide bowl with a slice of white bread on the side, it was warming and heavy in the best way. Customers who worked outdoors in the fall and winter months relied on it as a reliable midday meal. Chili. A bowl of diner chili was thick with ground beef, kidney beans, and a deep red sauce seasoned with cumin and chili powder. Some diners served it as a standalone dish with crackers. Others used it as a topping for hot dogs or fries. Regional variations existed across the country, particularly in the Southwest and Midwest, where chili was taken seriously and recipes were guarded. But the diner version was broadly accessible and unpretentious, designed to warm people up and fill them quickly without much fuss. Fried chicken. Southern diners had been serving it for generations, but by the 1950s it had spread well beyond its regional roots. Bone-in pieces of chicken, coated in seasoned flour and fried in a cast-iron pan or deep fryer, served with biscuits and a side of mashed potatoes or coleslaw. The skin was the most important part, and a good diner cook knew how to get it crackling and golden without drying out the meat underneath. It was a weekend dish in many places, something customers looked forward to on Friday or Saturday when the kitchen had time to make it properly. Rice pudding. It was one of the oldest desserts on the diner menu and one of the most quietly satisfying. Short grain rice cooked slowly in milk with sugar and vanilla until it thickened into a soft, creamy pudding, then dusted with cinnamon on top. It was served cold from a small bowl, usually alongside pie and jello in the dessert case. Rice pudding did not draw attention to itself, but it had a loyal following among older customers who had been eating it since childhood. It was gentle, not too sweet, and easy to eat at any hour. The hot dog. It had a permanent place in the diner lineup, simple and fast to prepare. A beef frankfurter nestled in a soft steamed bun, dressed with mustard and relish, sometimes topped with onions or a stripe of ketchup. The hot dog came from street food and ballpark culture, but settled comfortably into the diner setting. It was the go-to order for customers who wanted something quick and light, and for children, it was almost always the first choice on the menu. Some diners offered a chili version, loaded with thick beef chili and shredded cheese, which turned a simple item into something more substantial. The club sandwich. It was the diner's answer to something a little more substantial. 3 slices of toasted white bread stacked with turkey, bacon, lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise, then cut into triangles and held together with toothpicks. The club sandwich had roots going back earlier in the century, but the 1950s diner gave it a permanent home. It felt slightly more refined than a burger, but still casual enough to eat at a counter stool. Most diners served it with a side of fries or coleslaw. French fries. No diner plate was complete without them. Cut from whole potatoes, dropped into hot oil, and salted immediately after frying, they were the default side dish for nearly everything on the menu. The 1950s saw fries become deeply embedded in American eating habits, partly because of the rise of fast food, but also because diners had been perfecting them for years. A good batch was crisp on the outside and soft inside. They were eaten fast, straight off the plate, sometimes dipped in ketchup, sometimes not. The patty melt. It sits somewhere between a burger and a sandwich. A beef patty cooked flat, placed on rye bread with caramelized onions and melted Swiss cheese, then griddled until the whole thing is pressed and toasted. The patty melt gained real popularity in the late 1940s and moved firmly into diner culture through the 1950s. It had a slightly more savory, complex flavor than a standard burger, thanks to the onions and the bread. It became one of those quiet menu items that regulars always ordered, but first-timers sometimes overlooked. Meatloaf. Diners with a hot plate section almost always had meatloaf on the menu. It came out of the Depression era as a way to stretch ground beef with breadcrumbs and seasoning, and by the 1950s, it had become genuine comfort food rather than just a budget solution. Served in thick slices with mashed potatoes and brown gravy, it was the kind of meal that felt like home cooking, even when you were eating at a counter. Wednesday and Thursday were often meatloaf days, and regulars planned their visits around it. The BLT. Bacon, lettuce, and tomato on toasted white bread with mayonnaise. It sounds almost too simple, but the BLT earned its place as one of the most ordered sandwiches of the era. The key was the toast, which had to be firm enough to hold the ingredients without going soft from the tomato. Diners made them quickly and consistently, which suited the lunch rush perfectly. The BLT had been around before the 1950s, but it was post-war prosperity and reliable bacon supply that helped it become a diner standard. Chicken fried steak. It was Southern cooking that found its way onto diner menus across the country. A tenderized beef cutlet, battered and fried like a piece of chicken, served with white cream gravy poured over the top. The name came from the cooking method, not the ingredient. In Texas and the broader South, it was already a deeply familiar dish, and as people moved around the country after the war, so did their food preferences. By the mid-1950s, you could find it far outside its regional origins, sitting beside mashed potatoes on a blue plate special, the milkshake. It arrived at the table cold and thick, usually in a tall metal cup with a straw and a glass already filled partway from the overflow. Vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry were the standard flavors, though some diners offered variations. The electric milkshake machine had been in use since the 1930s, but it was the 1950s soda fountain culture that made the milkshake feel like an experience. Teenagers especially gathered around diner counters to order them. The shake was as much about the atmosphere as the drink itself. Hash browns. They came with almost every breakfast plate without needing to be requested. Shredded potato pressed flat on the griddle and cooked until the underside was deep brown and crisp, then flipped once. The outside had a crunch, and the inside stayed soft. Getting them right required a hot surface and patience, and the best diner cooks knew exactly when to leave them alone. Hash browns were not glamorous, but they were one of the things customers noticed when they were done well and complained about when they were not. The Reuben sandwich. It was one of the more layered items on a diner menu. Corned beef piled onto rye bread with sauerkraut, Swiss cheese, and Thousand Island dressing, then pressed on the griddle until the cheese melted and the bread crisped. The exact origin of the Reuben is still debated, but by the 1950s, it had found a comfortable home behind diner counters across the country. It had a strong, tangy flavor that set it apart from milder sandwich options, and the customers who ordered it tended to order it every time. Egg salad sandwich. It was a lunchtime staple that required nothing more than hard-boiled eggs, mayonnaise, a little mustard, and salt. Mixed together and spooned onto soft white bread, it was cool, creamy, and filling. The egg salad sandwich belonged to the quieter side of the diner menu, not as celebrated as a burger or a club, but consistently ordered by the same loyal customers day after day. It was also inexpensive to make, which kept it priced low and accessible to workers eating on a short break. Tuna melt. A scoop of tuna salad placed on an open-faced slice of bread, topped with a slice of tomato and a layer of cheese, then slid under the broiler until the cheese bubbled. The tuna melt was warm and filling in a way that a cold tuna sandwich was not, and diners adopted it quickly because it used simple ingredients already on hand. Canned tuna was affordable and widely available in post-war America, which helped make it a practical and popular menu addition throughout the decade. Banana cream pie. While apple pie carried the cultural weight, banana cream pie held its own in the dessert case. A pastry shell filled with vanilla custard and sliced bananas, topped with a thick layer of whipped cream. It needed to be eaten fresh, which meant a good diner made it that morning and sold it by the afternoon. The combination of the creamy custard and the soft banana had a richness that felt more luxurious than the price suggested. Regular customers knew which diners made it well and which ones let it sit too long. Salisbury steak. It occupied an interesting space between the hamburger and a proper beef entree. A seasoned ground beef patty, shaped into an oval and pan-fried, then served covered in brown mushroom gravy with mashed potatoes alongside. The dish dated back to the 19th century, named after a physician who recommended lean beef as part of a healthy diet, but it had long since left that origin behind. By the 1950s, it was diner comfort food in its most straightforward form, the kind of hot plate special that made customers feel genuinely fed rather than simply not hungry. Waffles. The diner waffle was pressed in a heavy iron until the outside was firm and deeply golden, with a soft, slightly chewy interior. It arrived at the table with a pat of butter already beginning to melt into the grid and a side of maple syrup. Some diners offered waffles only at breakfast, others kept them available all day. They were slightly more special than pancakes in the way they looked and felt, and customers who ordered them tended to linger over them rather than eat quickly. A waffle plate on a Sunday morning became a small ritual for many families. Fried egg sandwich. It was one of the simplest things a diner could make, and one of the most consistently ordered. A fried egg, cooked to order on the griddle, placed between 2 slices of toasted white bread with a slice of American cheese, and sometimes a smear of butter. Salt and pepper, nothing more. The fried egg sandwich was a working person's breakfast, fast and filling, something that could be eaten standing at the counter before heading to a job site or a morning shift. It cost almost nothing and tasted exactly like what it was meant to be. Chocolate cake. Most diners kept a chocolate layer cake behind the counter, cut into thick slices and displayed under a glass dome. 2 or 3 layers of dark chocolate sponge held together with chocolate frosting, dense and rich without being overly sweet. It was the dessert for customers who were not interested in pie. A slice of chocolate cake with a cup of black coffee was a common combination at the end of a meal, particularly in the evening. The cake did not need to be fancy, it just needed to be made well, and the diners that got it right found that it sold out before the day was over. Corned beef hash. It was a breakfast dish that used leftover corned beef to its full advantage. Diced or shredded corned beef mixed with chopped potatoes and onions, pressed flat onto a hot griddle, and cooked until the bottom formed a dark, crispy crust. Most diners served it with a fried or poached egg placed directly on top. The dish had a salty, savory depth that plain eggs could not match, and it was filling enough to carry a person through a long morning of physical work. Customers who ordered it once almost always came back for it. Soft-boiled eggs. They appeared on the breakfast menu as something quiet and traditional. 2 eggs lowered into simmering water for just a few minutes, then brought to the table in small ceramic cups or cracked open over a piece of buttered toast. The white was just set, and the yolk was still warm and runny, meant to be scooped out with a small spoon or soaked up with the bread. Soft-boiled eggs required timing and attention, and the diners that got them right earned a certain quiet respect from customers who knew the difference. Creamed chipped beef on toast. It was a dish with military roots, widely eaten in mess halls during both World Wars, and it followed soldiers home into civilian life. Thin strips of dried, salted beef folded into a thick white cream sauce, poured over slices of toasted white bread. Soldiers had given it an unflattering nickname that stuck for decades, but that did not stop it from appearing on diner menus throughout the 1950s. For many customers, it was a taste of familiarity, a connection to shared experience, and it remained a popular breakfast or lunch option well into the decade. Tomato soup. It came from a can in most diners, and nobody pretended otherwise. Condensed tomato soup diluted with milk or water, heated on the stove, and poured into a wide bowl. Simple as it was, it held a warmth and comfort that customers returned to regularly. Paired with a grilled cheese sandwich, it became one of the most instinctively satisfying combinations on the entire menu. Campbell's had been producing canned tomato soup since the late 1800s, and by the 1950s, it was so embedded in American eating culture that homemade versions were actually less common than the canned variety. Biscuits and gravy. It was a Southern and Midwestern staple that showed up at diner breakfast counters across those regions without apology. Soft, fluffy biscuits, split open and covered in a thick white sausage gravy made from pan drippings, flour, milk, and crumbled breakfast sausage. The gravy was seasoned heavily with black pepper, which gave it a mild heat that balanced the richness of the biscuit. It was an extremely filling dish for a low price, which made it a dependable choice for customers eating before a full day of manual labor. Denver omelet. The diner omelet had many versions, but the Denver stood out as one of the most recognized. Eggs beaten and folded around a filling of diced ham, green bell pepper and onion, cooked flat on the griddle and served open or folded. Some accounts trace its origins to Western cattle drives, where cooks worked with whatever ingredients were available. By the 1950s, it had settled firmly into diner culture as a hearty breakfast option with enough substance to replace a full plate. It was savory, straightforward, and almost universally available. Stuffed bell peppers. They belong to the hot plate section of the menu, typically listed as a daily special rather than a permanent fixture. Green bell peppers, hollowed out and filled with a mixture of seasoned ground beef, cooked rice, and tomato sauce, then baked until the pepper softened and the filling set. Stuffed bell peppers had a homemade quality that made them feel different from the griddle items that dominated most diner menus. They took longer to prepare, which is why they appeared on specific days, and regulars who knew the schedule planned around them. Butterscotch pudding. It sat in the dessert case beside the rice pudding and the jello, served in small glass dishes with a dollop of whipped cream on top. Made from brown sugar, butter, and milk cooked together into a smooth, glossy custard, it had a deep caramel sweetness that felt richer than vanilla, but less intense than chocolate. Butterscotch was a flavor closely associated with the era, appearing in candies, sauces, and desserts throughout the decade. In a diner setting, it was an unpretentious, affordable way to end a meal on something sweet without ordering a full slice of pie. Pea soup. Thick, green, and deeply savory, pea soup was a cold-weather menu item that showed up in diners from the Northeast to the Midwest. Dried split peas cooked down with a ham hock until the soup became almost porridge-like in consistency, finished with salt, pepper, and sometimes a handful of diced carrots. It was served with a piece of crusty bread or crackers on the side. Pea soup required hours of simmering, which meant diners that offered it had usually started it early in the morning. The effort showed in the flavor, and customers who ordered it knew they were getting something that had been made with patience. Grilled pork sausage links. They came on the side of almost every breakfast plate, 2 or 3 links cooked on the griddle until the skin was tight and slightly blistered. The inside stayed juicy and seasoned with sage and black pepper in the traditional American breakfast sausage style. They were simple and expected rather than special, but their absence was noticed immediately. Some diners offered patties instead of links, and regulars had strong preferences one way or the other. Either way, sausage was as fundamental to the diner breakfast plate as the eggs themselves. Coconut cream pie. It held a place in the dessert case alongside banana cream and chocolate cream, 3 variations on the same basic idea, executed in distinctly different ways. A pastry shell filled with vanilla custard, stirred through with shredded coconut, topped with whipped cream and a scattering of toasted coconut on top. The coconut added a subtle chewiness and a faint tropical sweetness that set it apart from the other cream pies. It was not as universally popular as apple or chocolate, but the customers who preferred it were quietly passionate about it and rarely ordered anything else for dessert.